Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. In a quiet neighborhood in Boston's western suburb of Newton, April sunlight pours through the kitchen window onto the kitchen island. Daniel Foster stood, tapping his fingers on the marble countertop and staring at the cell phone in front of him. The text message on the screen couldn't have been clearer. There's an emergency meeting tonight, so I may have to stay up late. Don't wait for me. This is the fourth time Elaine has sent a similar message this month. 15 years, Daniel thought. 15 years of marriage, from passionate love to dullness and now estrangement. Recall their first encounter, which was at an alumni reunion at Boston University. At the time, he had just completed a degree in communications engineering and Elaine was an aspiring marketing student. Her confidence and energy immediately drew him in. That glow, as if the entire room was brightened by her presence. 15 years of marriage had allowed Daniel to know his wife like the back of his hand. As a telecom network engineer, observing details is in his nature. In the last 6 months, these overtime and emergency meetings have become more frequent. At first, he didn't think much of it. With Elaine's career on the upswing as a marketing executive at Horizon Pharmaceuticals, it's normal to be busy. But his intuition told him that things were not as simple as they appeared. Their marriage used to be the envy of their friends around them. For the first 5 years, they were inseparable, traveling together and experiencing professional ups and downs together. Daniel rose from a junior network engineer to a regional technical supervisor, and Elaine worked her way up from an assistant position to management. They bought this house in an elegant neighborhood and planned their future family life. Subtle changes crept in at the start of the 6th year. Daniel's company expanded nationally, and he had to travel frequently. At the same time, Elaine accepted a more challenging position with increased work pressure. They began to have their own social circles and spent less and less time together. Still, they try to maintain that closeness, the weekend dinner dates, the annual vacation trips. But gradually, that spiritual connection seemed to dissipate. In their 10th year, they experienced a serious crisis. Elaine had a miscarriage. It was her first pregnancy. Doctors say it's a common occurrence, but the blow affected her deeply. Daniel tries to be comforting, but he doesn't know how to deal with his own grief, much less how to help his wife through it. He chose to bury his head in the sand, while Elaine chose to remain silent. During that time, although they lived under the same roof, their hearts grew farther and farther apart. Daniel replied with a short message, "Okay, be safe." He put down his cell phone, walked to the fridge, and pulled out a can of beer. Outside the window, the neighbor's children were playing, and their laughter pierced his heart. Daniel and Elaine didn't have children, not because they didn't want them, but because after that miscarriage, Elaine seemed to lose the courage to try. Whenever Daniel would bring it up, she would always say, "Wait a little longer, until my project is over, until our finances are more stable, and until we have more time." And now he doubted that that time would ever really come. Opening his beer, Daniel walked to the living room and looked around the home they had built together. The pictures: they smiled at each other at the wedding, hugged in front of the Aegean Sea on a trip to Greece, and raised their glasses in celebration when Elaine got a promotion. These memories seemed to come from another world, a world that was rapidly moving away. He picked up the remote and turned on the TV, but wasn't really watching. His thoughts drifted back to a weekend a few months ago. He finished his business trip early and decided to surprise Elaine. When he arrived home, he found the house empty. He texted her, but there was no reply. She didn't return until 10 p.m., elaborately made up and scantily clad, smelling faintly of alcohol and some kind of cologne he wasn't familiar with. "Corporate event," she explained, arranged out of the blue. But her eyes flickered and she avoided his gaze. That night, she took a long bath and then claimed to be too tired and went straight to sleep. It was the first time Daniel felt a strong sense of unease, a gut feeling that told him their marriage was in danger. After dinner, Daniel sat in his study, the blue light of his laptop screen reflecting on his face. He opened the credit card statement for the family account. Over the months, some spending patterns have caught his attention. The bill from the fancy restaurant, which showed up on a day he didn't know about. The hotel charge, on a weekend Elaine claimed to have been away on business. And the jewelry store, a purchase made before their wedding anniversary, but for which he never received any gifts. He closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. He didn't want to believe his suspicions, but the evidence was becoming more and more obvious. The next day, He made a decision. He needed to know exactly what was happening. Instead of questioning Elaine directly, Daniel chooses a more discreet approach. He hired a private investigator, a retired police officer named Frank McAllister. Frank was recommended through a lawyer friend of Daniel's who was said to have handled hundreds of matrimonial investigation cases and was known for his professionalism and discretion. On Tuesday afternoon, Daniel met Frank at a quiet cafe on the banks of the Charles River. The cafe's corner location provided enough privacy that the surrounding noise was enough to muffle their conversation. Frank was a man in his early 60s, his gray hair cut short, his eyes sharp and calm. He was wearing a plain dark suit and looked like any businessman, which was just the disguise he needed for his job. "I need to know the truth," Daniel says, getting straight to the point after a brief introduction, no matter how brutal it is. Frank stirred his coffee slowly, watching Daniel's expression. "Before I take on these types of cases, I always make sure that the client is truly ready to know the truth. Sometimes not knowing is a blessing instead." "No," Daniel shook his head. "Uncertainty is more unbearable than the pain of certainty. I need to know if I'm fooling myself." Frank nodded. He'd seen too many similar cases. Most people actually know the answer inside when they suspect their spouse is cheating. "Are you ready to face it? Whatever the outcome?" Daniel looked Frank straight in the eye, his voice low but firm. "I can't keep living a lie anymore. If she's cheating, I need to know, and if I'm wrong, I need to know, so I can let go of those doubts and fix our relationship." Frank pulled a contract and a small notebook out of his briefcase. "Tell me the details of your suspicions and the pattern of your wife's daily activities. The more detail, the better." Over the next hour, Daniel detailed Elaine's recent behavioral changes: frequent late nights, new clothing and perfume purchases, diminished interest in shared activities, and those sudden work meetings and company events. He also mentioned unusual purchases on credit card bills. Frank took notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. Finally, he closed the notebook. "Okay, I'll start surveillance tomorrow. I need her picture, places she frequents, and vehicle information. I will report back to you every 3 days and contact you immediately if there are any significant findings." Daniel hands Frank an envelope containing Elaine's photo and details. He felt like he was betraying her, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief. Finally, someone would help him find out the truth. "One more thing," Frank said before getting up to leave. "Once you start, there's no turning back. Are you sure you want to do this?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm sure." Walking out of the cafe, Daniel felt a wave of vertigo. Things have already begun. Whatever the outcome, he knew his life would never be the same again. A week later, Frank brought the first report and a few photos. In the photo, Elaine, wearing a dress Daniel has never seen before, is entering a fancy restaurant with a tall man in a suit. Their body language needs no explanation. Intimate hand contact, the look in each other's eyes as they listen to each other, and the kind of silent understanding that only lovers have. "His name is Martin Reynolds," Frank explains, "a senior sales representative for Horizon Pharmaceuticals, focusing on new drug promotions. According to my research, they've known each other for about 8 months and originally met at a healthcare marketing summit." Frank opens his tablet and shows a few pictures. Martin in the photo is around his early 40s, with a straight figure, dark brown hair slicked back, and always has that confident smile on his face. He is very popular in the company and has a great track record, winning Sales Star of the Year last year. Daniel felt a stabbing pain in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm and scrutinize the photos. "Is he married?" Frank shook his head. "Divorced 2 years ago. Ostensibly, it's because of personality differences, but the inside story I've poked around is that his ex-wife found out that he cheated on her, and more than once." Frank turned to another page of notes. "There's an interesting pattern. He seems to specialize in married women. I found 2 ex-lovers willing to talk, both of whom were in relationships with him within the marriage." "How do they know each other?" Daniel asked, his voice calmer than he expected. "One is a hospital administrator, and the other is a pharmacy manager. Both are associated with his work. He seemed to have a set pattern of pursuit, first a work contact, then a chance meeting, then career advice and support, and finally a personal relationship developed." Frank showed more photos of Martin and Elaine on various occasions: an upscale Italian restaurant, the lobby of a boutique hotel, and even a picnic in the countryside. Each photo clearly shows the closeness between them, the caressing hands, the proximity of their bodies, the exchange of glances. From what I've seen, their relationship has gotten pretty deep. Frank says they see each other at least 2 to 3 times a week, usually on weekday evenings or weekends when you're traveling. They often go to the Oakwood Hotel on the outskirts of town and usually stay for 2 to 3 hours. Every detail pierced Daniel's heart like a knife. He had suspected, now he was certain. But surprisingly, more than anger, he felt a deep sadness and loss. 15 years of relationship just faded away in a lie. Where does he live? Daniel asked. A fancy apartment building in the Back Bay area, less than 20 minutes from your house. Bachelor's apartments at a great price. Frank paused to watch Daniel's reaction. Would you like to know his full address? Daniel understands what Frank is worried about. A lot of injured husbands act impulsively. Not for that, he shook his head. I just want to understand the whole situation. Frank nodded and seemed a little relieved. It's also interesting. According to those two ex-lovers, Martin would always imply that he wanted these women to divorce and start a new life with him after the relationship had progressed to a certain point. But as soon as things get complicated or stressful, he retreats quickly. This information put Daniel in deep thought. Not only has Elaine betrayed him, but she seems to be the target of a love interest, someone who may not be truly committed to her. It made him feel both a twinge of pity and a strange sense of determination. He needed to know more, not only for himself, but for Elaine as well. Keep investigating, he said to Frank. I want to know everything I can about this Martin. His past, his work, his family background, his relationship patterns with his ex-wife and other women. In particular, see if you can find any information against him. Frank looked at Daniel with a flash of admiration in his eyes. Most people at this stage choose to just end the marriage or confront their spouse. But you seem to be looking for a deeper understanding. Know your enemy, Daniel said calmly. I need complete information to make a decision. As Daniel leaves the cafe, a light rain begins to fall from the sky, as if echoing the gloom within him. But at the same time, he felt a strange clarity. For the first time, instead of passively waiting for the truth to surface, he actively sought it out. Whatever awaited him ahead, at least this time, he would be in control. For the next few weeks, Daniel lived a double life. Outwardly, he's the supportive guy who shows understanding for his wife's busy schedule. Privately, he gathers every detail about her betrayal. Frank's report gets more and more detailed, where Martin and Elaine date, the weekends they spend together, even their favorite restaurant ironically. That's exactly where Daniel and Elaine celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel and Frank stayed in regular contact. Frank not only followed Elaine and Martin's activities, but also delved into Martin's background. He interviewed Martin's former co-workers, reviewed public records, and even found his ex-wife for a discreet conversation. Each piece of information is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that gradually reveals the true nature of Martin Reynolds. Friday night, Frank meets with Daniel again, this time in a more secluded location, a motel restaurant on the edge of town. I've made some important discoveries, Frank said as soon as he sat down, his tone more serious than usual. He opened his laptop and displayed a series of documents. Martin Reynolds' past is more complicated than we think. First of all, he's been divorced not just once, but twice. The first marriage, in his 20s, lasted 3 years and had 1 child. Daniel frowned. His public record only shows 1 marriage. Yes, he seems to have deliberately hidden his first marriage. What's more, he's almost completely removed from the life of his first child. According to his ex-wife Sophie, he hasn't seen his son Michael in 7 years and has been behind on child support payments for years. Frank shows more documents, court records, delinquency notices, and even a couple of Sophie's desperate emails pleading with Martin to fulfill his fatherly duties. But here's the kicker. Frank pointed to a medical report on the screen. Martin has a little-known secret. He carries an inherited disease gene, a rare blood disorder called Singleton-Morris syndrome. The disease is not fatal, but it can lead to serious immune system problems that require lifelong treatment and monitoring. Daniel stared at the screen, digesting the information. The disease has a 50% chance of being passed on to a child, Frank continues, and his son Michael unfortunately has it. Treatment is extremely expensive, Over $100,000 per year, much of it borne by Sophie alone. Does he know he carries this gene? Daniel asked. Absolutely no, Frank affirmed. He was genetically tested during his first marriage and came back positive. But according to Sophie, he has refused to acknowledge this, even suggesting that it was her genetic problems that caused the child's illness. Daniel felt a surge of anger come over him. Did he mention this to Elaine? Not that I know of. I intercepted some of their text message conversations, in which Elaine repeatedly mentioned a desire to have children, and Martin always equivocated, saying that he would wait until their relationship had stabilized before discussing the topic. This information was deeply disturbing to Daniel. Just a few months ago, Elaine had expressed to him her desire to try to conceive again. Now it appears that she may be planning to start a new life with a man who is withholding important medical information. There's more, Frank said gravely. In digging deeper, I discovered that Martin actually has 3 children from 3 different relationships. In addition to Michael, he has 2 illegitimate children, one with Rachel, a married woman in Chicago, who is now 5 years old, and the other with Diane of Miami, who is now 3 years old. Both children suffer from the same disease, and Martin has essentially disappeared from their lives. Frank showed photos and contact information for both mothers. Their stories are strikingly similar. Both met Martin at work, were attracted to his charisma, and eventually entered into a relationship with him within their marriage, only to be dumped when they became pregnant. It's not a coincidence, Frank concludes. It's a pattern. He seems to specialize in seeking out women with successful careers but dissatisfied marriages, giving them the attention and affirmation they lacked in their marriages, and then quickly pulling away once the relationship becomes complicated or liable. And worst of all, he knows he carries the gene for a serious genetic disease and fails to inform these women, putting them and their children at health risk. Daniel lapsed into silence. The discovery far exceeded his initial expectations. Martin isn't just an adulterer. He's someone who systematically cheats on women and then abandons them when they need support the most. And Elaine, no matter how bad her choices were, now seems to be another potential victim of this man. I need DNA evidence, Daniel eventually said. That will prove that Martin does carry this gene and that these children are indeed his. Frank nodded. I've already started on it. Getting a sample of his DNA wasn't hard. A discarded coffee cup, a used napkin. As for paternity, Sophie has agreed to offer Michael's medical records as evidence. These should be enough to prove Martin's genetic status and his responsibility to his children. Daniel took a deep breath and felt a strange calm. Do it more thoroughly. I would be willing to pay the additional cost of comprehensive genetic testing to confirm the specific type of this disease and the risk of transmission. In the meantime, gather all the legal evidence regarding Martin's evasion of his support responsibilities. Frank looked at Daniel curiously. What are you going to do with this information? Daniel looked Frank straight in the eye. I'm not sure yet. But I knew that when the time came for the truth to be revealed, I would need conclusive proof. Not just for myself, but for Elaine. After leaving the restaurant, Daniel sat alone in his car for a long time as the rain pounded against the windshield, creating a sort of isolated privacy. In this space, he finally allowed himself to feel those long-suppressed emotions, the anger, the pain, the betrayal, but there was also a strange hint of relief. Because now he knows that this isn't just about Elaine's infidelity. It's about a bigger deception, a lie that could destroy more lives. And in this moment, he makes a decision. He won't act just for revenge. He'll act to expose the truth. Because sometimes the truth itself is the most powerful weapon. The discovery sent a wave of nausea through Daniel. Not only because of Martin's irresponsibility, but also because Elaine had mentioned her desire to have children several times. If she and Martin had a child, what risks would they face? While Frank continues to gather evidence, Daniel's daily life becomes a carefully choreographed performance. Every morning, he gets up, prepares breakfast, and talks to Elaine about daily chores as if it were business as usual. He greets her about her work progress, shares his own project challenges, and even offers to watch a movie or go out to dinner together on the weekends. And all those moments, he carries that heavy secret with him. He knows where she really goes every time she works overtime. He knows the hidden text messages in her cell phone. He knows every meeting she has with Martin. This double life brings a strange sense of sobriety. Daniel began to notice details he'd previously overlooked. The slight frown Elaine wore when she lied. The neutral tone she intended to maintain when referring to the company Martin worked for. And her habit of leaving the room whenever she received certain phone calls. He also noticed the occasional flash of guilt in her eyes, especially when he was being particularly considerate of her. Once, on Elaine's birthday, Daniel gave her a delicate silver necklace with a tiny sapphire, her favorite gemstone. Her eyes moistened as he put the necklace on her, and for a moment, he even thought she might confess everything. But the moment passed quickly, and she just whispered her thanks before turning to fix her hair and hide her emotions. These moments make Daniel realize that no matter how much Elaine betrays, she is not completely heartless. Her internal struggle was real. She just chose to run from it rather than face it. This realization did not alleviate his pain, but it gave him a complex sympathy, not understanding, but understanding of human frailty. One evening at the end of May, when Daniel came home from working late, he found Elaine sitting in the living room waiting for him. The room was dimly lit, with only a floor lamp casting a warm glow. An unopened bottle of red wine sat on the dining room table, and 2 wine glasses stood silently beside it. The look on her face told him that tonight was no ordinary night. Daniel felt his heart racing, a moment of both anticipation and fear. Is it a confession? Is it a break? Or is it just another elaborate lie? He put down his briefcase and took off his jacket, trying to remain calm. We need to talk. Elaine spoke, her voice unnaturally calm. Daniel put down his briefcase and slowly sat down across from her. Okay, I'm listening. Elaine took a deep breath, her eyes wandering. I don't know how to begin, but I think our marriage has come to an end. Even though Daniel had anticipated this moment, hearing those words was still like a blow. He kept his facial expression calm, despite the waves inside. I don't feel the connection between us anymore, Elaine continues. We've become 2 strangers living under the same roof. I think we all deserve a chance to find true happiness. Daniel watched Elaine's eyes for any sign of remorse or hesitation, but he saw nothing. There was only determination and perhaps a hint of relief. He wonders if she will mention Martin and have the courage to admit her infidelity. Anyone else? He asked softly, a slight imperceptible tremor in his voice. Elaine's eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly. Her fingers wrapped nervously around the rim of her glass. It's not about anyone else, Daniel. It's about us. We've lost everything we once had. Lies. Another lie piled on top of the rubble of 15 years of marriage. Daniel felt a surge of anger ignite in his chest, but with it came a strange calm. He already knew the truth, and her denials merely added drama to the eventual revelation. Are you sure? He pressed on, giving her a chance to confess. There's nothing. Other factors influence your decision. Elaine avoided his gaze and pretended to straighten her napkin on the table. We've been trying for a long time, Daniel. We all knew something was wrong. We became 2 strangers who just happened to live under the same roof. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. The words sounded so rehearsed, as if she had rehearsed them over and over in her head countless times. Daniel could even imagine her and Martin talking about the conversation together, planning the best breakup strategy. We haven't even tried marriage counseling, Daniel pointed out calmly. If you really think the problem is our communication or emotional connection, shouldn't you try to fix it first? This sound advice left Elaine visibly disturbed. I've thought about it. I don't think counseling will solve our core problems. Sometimes people just don't fit in with each other anymore. Daniel almost wanted to laugh, but he controlled himself. It's all so transparent, so predictable. She had made her choice, and he was just an obstacle that needed to be handled with grace. How ironic that in the midst of her betrayal, she still tries to appear thoughtful and rational. I see, he said simply, deciding not to push her any further. Now is not the time. He had more important plans. The room fell into silence, with only the sound of the clock ticking to fill the void. Elaine looks a little confused, clearly surprised by his calm response. She may have expected anger, questioning, even pleading, but not this almost cold acceptance. I've contacted a lawyer. She finally broke the silence, her voice firmer, as if to make up for the hesitation she'd just experienced. And they said the whole process can be relatively simple, as long as we can negotiate amicably. Daniel noticed that she had used the word they instead of she or he, Another little lie to cover up the fact that she had already met with Martin's lawyer. He knew this because Frank had taken a picture of the three of them outside a law firm. "If that's what you want," he said calmly, "then I won't stand in your way." Elaine seemed surprised by his calm reaction. What did she expect? An argument? Pleading? Tears? But Daniel gives her a completely different reaction, which overwhelms her for a moment. "I've contacted a lawyer," she said finally, "and I'll show you the papers when they're ready." Daniel nodded. Okay. The next few weeks were a well-choreographed show. Elaine contacted a divorce attorney and prepared the papers, while Daniel acted as an understanding and calm husband, accepting the end of the marriage. He even signed the preliminary agreement without reading the contents. "Don't you want to see the terms?" Elaine asked, confused. Daniel smiled and shook his head. "I'm sure you'll be fair. It doesn't need to get ugly between us." This reaction clearly disturbed Elaine. She expects resistance, retention, but Daniel gives total submission. This was not what she expected. Meanwhile, Daniel's plans are underway. He needs hard evidence, not only about Elaine's infidelity, but also about Martin's secret. Through Frank's help, he obtains a sample of Martin's DNA, a discarded coffee cup, a used napkin. Daniel paid extra for genetic testing, which confirmed that Martin did indeed carry the gene for that genetic disorder. Even more shocking, Frank discovers that Martin has two other illegitimate children, both of whom he abandoned, one of whom also suffers from the disease. This man is not only an expert at betraying marriages, he is also a repeat offender who abandons his responsibilities. In mid-June, the divorce was almost finalized. All that was missing was the final signature, and Daniel and Elaine would officially end their 15-year marriage. At this critical moment, Daniel received a text message from Frank. "They're celebrating tonight at Le Jardin. 8 o'clock booking." Le Jardin, the French restaurant where Daniel and Elaine celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The choice to celebrate the divorce there was more than a coincidence. It was more like a deliberate taunt. But Daniel wasn't angry. On the contrary, he felt a strange calmness. Because tonight, all will be revealed. Daniel opens the safe and takes out the envelope. The envelope contained several documents. The results of Martin's DNA test, which showed the genes for the genetic disorders he carried, information about the 3 children he had abandoned, including medical records, and, most importantly, a legal document proving that Martin was facing a lawsuit for refusing to pay child support. He put on his best suit, fixed his hair, and drove to Le Jardin. When he arrived, the restaurant was already crowded. Through the window, he could see Elaine and Martin sitting at a table in the corner, raising their glasses. Elaine was wearing a red dress, one Daniel had never seen before. Martin suits up with a smug grin on his face. Daniel took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the dining room. Located on Boston's bustling Newbury Street, Le Jardin is an upscale restaurant known for its fine French cuisine. 5 years ago, Daniel had booked a special dinner here for their 10th wedding anniversary. It was then that they smiled at each other in the candlelight, tears of happiness shining in Elaine's eyes, and she covered her mouth in surprise when he gave her the emerald bracelet. It was one of the happiest moments of their marriage. And tonight, this place will witness a very different scene. Daniel sat in the car for a moment, taking deep breaths and organizing his thoughts. He checked the envelope in his pocket again to make sure all the documents were there: Martin's DNA test results, his 3 children's medical records, and the court documents from the lawsuit against him for arrears and child support. These are his weapons, not to harm, but to expose the truth. The waiter at the door of the restaurant recognized him and nodded respectfully in greeting. "Mr. Foster, it's good to see you again." "Thanks, Tony," Daniel responded, remembering that the waiter had served him them on the night of their anniversary. "I'm not here to dine tonight. I just need to briefly meet those 2 guests sitting in the corner." Tony nodded without asking any more questions and politely guided him into the dining room. An atmosphere of French romance pervades the interior of Le Jardin, where soft lighting, delicate decor, and lilting piano music create an intimate setting. The smell of fresh bread, butter, and herbs filled the air, and in the background there were occasional soft giggles and the crisp sound of crystal glasses clinking. Daniel walked slowly through the dining room, his eyes firmly locked on the table in the corner. It was one of the most intimate seats in the restaurant, and he and Elaine sat there back then. Now Elaine was wearing a bright red dress, a new dress Daniel had never seen before, elegant and bold. She was smiling, that big smile Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. Her eyes sparkling and vibrant, a sight that stabbed him like a knife. Martin is suited and booted, his light gray tailored suit accentuating his healthy complexion and confident demeanor. He leaned forward, his hand over Elaine's, and whispered something, with that victorious smile on his face. The champagne on the table had been opened, and the golden liquid in the two goblets shimmered in the light. A bouquet of red roses sat quietly aside, obviously a gift from Martin. They are celebrating the end of a marriage and the beginning of a new relationship. For them, it was a moment of triumph. For Daniel, it was a moment of revelation. A few of the waiters recognized Daniel. After all, he had been a regular here. They nodded their heads in friendly greeting, but did not disturb his forward progress. As Daniel walked over to Elaine and Martin's table, both of their smiles froze at the same time. "Daniel," Elaine blurted out in shock, her eyes widening. "What are you doing here?" Daniel kept a calm smile. "Good evening, Elaine. Looks like I interrupted a celebration." Martin quickly withdrew his hand from Elaine's and sat up straight, a flicker of caution in his eyes. "You must be Daniel." He held out his hand, trying to control the situation. "I'm Martin Reynolds." Daniel ignored the outstretched hand as his gaze turned to Elaine. "I want to congratulate you on your freedom. After all, 15 years of marriage doesn't end so easily." The other guests in the restaurant began to notice the scene, and the murmurs of conversation abetted. Elaine's face turns pale, her eyes pleading with Daniel not to create a scene in public. "Daniel, this isn't the place to talk," she whispered. "We can do this another time." "No, I want to talk now." Daniel's voice remained calm. "After all, you chose to celebrate at our special place, and I thought I should join in." Martin cleared his throat, trying to appear composed. "Look, man, I know how you feel. But that's just the way it is. Sometimes people get separated. There's no need to complicate things." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Complicated? No, Martin, I'm not here to complicate things. On the contrary, I'm here to simplify everything." He removed the envelope from the inside pocket of his suit and gently pushed it across the table. Elaine looked hesitantly at the envelope, as if it might explode at any moment. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "A gift," Daniel replied, "for your new beginning." Martin reached for the envelope and opened it with a hint of arrogance. As he began to read the documents inside, the smug smile on his face faded, replaced by shock and fear. "What does that mean?" Elaine asked, watching Martin's face change. Martin couldn't answer. His hands began to shake. Daniel answered on his behalf. "Martin has a little secret, Elaine. He carries a gene for an inherited disease, one that causes severe immune system problems. What's even more interesting is that he already has 3 children with the disease. 3 children he refuses to recognize or support." Elaine's eyes widened as she turned to Martin, expecting him to deny it. But Martin just sat there, papers clutched in his hands, mute. "And," Daniel continues, "he's facing a lawsuit for refusing to pay child support. Apparently, you're not the first married woman to fall under his spell, Elaine. He has a pattern: find unfulfilled married women, get them to fall in love with him, then dump them when things get complicated. This is bullshit." Martin finally found his voice, but his protests sounded hollow. "This so-called evidence proves nothing." Daniel looked at him calmly. "You have the DNA test results right here, Martin. The medical records of the 3 children are there as well. If you want to question their veracity, we can do another test. Or better yet, we can contact Sophie in Los Angeles, Rachel in Chicago, or Diane in Miami. I'm sure they'd all love to talk about how you came into their lives and then disappeared when you found out they were pregnant." The restaurant had fallen completely silent, all eyes focused on their table. Elaine looks like she's about to faint, her hands gripping the tablecloth, her knuckles white. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Daniel in a low voice, tears in her eyes. For the first time, Daniel let his true emotions show on his face, which were deep hurt and disappointment. "Because even though you betrayed me, Elaine, I still care about you. I can't let you start a new life with someone like that without knowing. Especially if you've always wanted kids." Martin stood up suddenly, and the chair fell back with a loud thud. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to listen to this." He turned to Elaine. "Do you believe this nonsense? It's obviously something he made up to get back at you." But Elaine didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the papers, especially the pictures of the children. The children in those photos, all with similar characteristics to Martin, were in hospital beds. Is it true? She asked Martin softly. Do you have children? Martin's silence had been an answer. And you never told me. Elaine continued, her voice becoming firmer. That you knew I wanted to have children and never mentioned the genetic disease you carry. Because it doesn't matter. Martin argued. That's a possibility, not a certainty. In medical advances, there are cures. The cure, Daniel interrupted. You mean those expensive treatments you refuse to pay for your own children? As I understand it, your oldest son Michael is now 13 years old and requires regular blood transfusions and immunosuppressive therapy. Medical expenses exceeded $100,000 per year. His mother Sophie had to quit her job to take care of him. And you? You don't even return her calls. Martin's face turned red as he grabbed his jacket and prepared to leave. I don't have to listen to this. But just as he turned to leave, a restaurant manager came up to him, phone in hand. Mr. Reynolds? Someone wants to talk to you. She said she was Sophie Williams, and it was about your son Michael. Martin froze, the blood completely gone from his face. The entire restaurant held their breath, waiting for his reaction. Eventually, instead of answering the phone, he walked briskly out of the restaurant, leaving Elaine sitting alone with the pile of revealing documents. Daniel stood still and watched as Elaine's tears began to fall. There was no gloating, no smugness, only a calm certainty that he had done the right thing. Why? Elaine finally asked. Why are you doing this? You could have gotten us divorced and gone your own way. Daniel looked at her deeply. Because even though you chose to betray our marriage, I still believe you deserve to know the truth. No one should start a new life based on a lie. After saying that, he turned around and prepared to leave. But Elaine called out to him. Wait, her voice broke. I owe you an explanation. Daniel stopped in his tracks, but didn't look back. That won't be necessary, Elaine. Everything is already clear. No, it's not clear, she insisted. I need you to know that it's not just because I'm bored or unfulfilled. I thought I had found something that was missing. But now I see that it was just another lie. Daniel finally turns around, and he sees a completely broken woman, no longer the confident, proud Elaine. In that moment, he felt a twinge of pity, but that was all. Whatever your reasoning, Elaine, it doesn't change what's already happened. Our marriage ended, not because I stopped loving you, but because you chose to betray it. He left the restaurant and stepped out into the night, feeling the early summer breeze on his face. For some reason, he felt an unprecedented relief, as if he had lifted a long-standing burden. The next few months are going to be tough for everyone. Divorce proceedings continue, but unlike before, they are now complicated and contentious. Elaine is no longer asking for a division of Daniel's pension or their joint investments. She just wants to get it over with quickly. After the public humiliation of that night at the restaurant, she became unusually quiet and almost reclusive. During the divorce hearing, she barely said a word and let her attorney handle everything. A mutual friend tells Daniel that Elaine has taken an extended leave of absence from Horizon Pharmaceuticals, reportedly for health reasons. When Daniel happens to meet her at the supermarket, the once radiant woman has become haggard and hollow-eyed. Even in his pain, Daniel had to admit that seeing her like this didn't bring him the satisfaction he expected. Meanwhile, the events of that night at Le Jardin were causing a furor in their social circles. Several of the patrons at the restaurant proved to be acquaintances of their mutual friends, and word spread quickly. Daniel didn't actively spread any details, but the truth always finds a way to spread. Soon, more stories begin to surface about Martin, other women he cheated on, more children who were hidden from him. Martin has completely disappeared and is rumored to have left Boston and moved to the West Coast. But his past is starting to catch up with him. Sophie Williams, the mother of his first child, decided to come forward publicly after learning there were other women and children. She contacted 2 other mothers, and together they filed a lawsuit against Martin for child support arrears and medical expenses. The case drew media attention, especially after a nonprofit organization concerned with responsible fatherhood stepped in. A local reporter conducts an in-depth investigation that exposes Martin's entire history of deception, from his first marriage in Chicago in his early years to his pattern of specifically targeting married women in the pharmaceutical industry. Even more shocking, the reporter discovers that Martin actually has 5 children, not 3 as Daniel initially found out, all carrying the gene for his hereditary disease, all of whom he abandoned. The story generated a lot of local attention, especially in the medical and pharmaceutical communities. Martin's company fired him under the pressure of negative publicity, stating that his behavior was inconsistent with the company's values. His career, built on charisma and trust, collapsed overnight. Bitterly, Martin's downfall brought little tangible relief to his victims. He quickly filed for bankruptcy protection, claiming that he couldn't pay the huge arrears and support payments. His bankruptcy attorney argued that due to unemployment and reputational damage, he was unable to maintain his previous level of income and therefore could not afford to pay the amount awarded by the court. But fate sometimes has its own unique way of being just. During a routine medical checkup, Martin was diagnosed with a similar immune system complication of his own, a rare adult-onset form of that genetic disorder. Ironically, he now needs the kind of expensive treatment he had refused to pay for his children. With no insurance and no income, he is forced to seek help from those he has hurt. The mother's support group, led by Sophie, decided to go through the legal process of ensuring that each child receives the maintenance they are entitled to. But in the meantime, they organized a fundraising campaign to provide medical support for all the children affected, including Martin himself. As she says, "We're not going to lower ourselves to his level. These children need to know that there are still people in the world who care about them, even though their father chose to avoid responsibility." This generosity shook many people, including Martin. While in therapy, he reportedly finally began to think seriously about his behavior and tried to make some kind of connection with his children. Whether the change was sincere or not, at least his children now knew of each other's existence and formed a special bond, a sibling bond forged in the face of adversity. For Elaine, the revelation of the truth brought profound self-reflection. For the first few weeks, she fell into a state of near depression. She lost focus at work and took a long vacation to gather her thoughts. Friends try to support her, but she declines most social invitations, and shame and remorse become her daily companions. That summer, Elaine made an unexpected decision. She contacted Sophie Williams and asked to meet. Initially, Sophie refuses, unable to understand why she should meet with her husband's lover. But Elaine's persistence eventually impressed her. In a quiet Boston cafe, 2 women sit down and share their respective stories, one a betrayed wife, the other a cheated lover. Surprisingly, this meeting opened an unexpected door for Elaine. As she learns about Michael's situation and that of other children, she finds a way to redefine herself. She began volunteering for the nonprofit organization that supports children with genetic disorders, using her marketing skills to help raise money and awareness. A few months later, she returned to work, but no longer at a pharmaceutical company, but as the director of advocacy at a medical foundation focused on rare disease research. The pay there was lower and the hours were longer, but Elaine found a new kind of satisfaction. She was finally doing something meaningful. She tried several times to contact Daniel, but he had moved and started a new life. The phone number has been changed, and mutual friends respect his decision not to provide new contact information. Eventually, she sent a long letter to his old email address, admitting her mistake, explaining her transformation, and seeking not forgiveness, but understanding. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Daniel," she wrote. "My betrayal is not worthy of forgiveness. But I want you to know that that night in the diner, that terrible, necessary night, changed me forever. I finally see my blindness and the irreparable damage I've done to you. I'm not that person anymore, even though the change came too late to save our marriage. I just hope you found peace and happiness in your new life, because you deserve that anyway." But Daniel didn't reply. Sometimes, some wounds are too deep to heal. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Meanwhile, Daniel's life is slowly being rebuilt. After his divorce, he accepted a new position with the company in Chicago and decided to change his circumstances completely. A new city, a new beginning, without the shadow of a memory. There, he gradually found his rhythm, rediscovered his passion for work, and even began to socialize. He joined a photography club, a hobby he had wanted to try for years but never had the time. Through his lens, he has learned to see the world in a different way, capturing beautiful moments that could easily go unnoticed. Photography has taught him patience and focus, and has provided a way to express those emotions that are hard to put into words. A year later, on a crisp fall day, Daniel sat in a cafe on the shores of Lake Michigan in Chicago, flipping through the morning paper that had arrived from Boston, one of the few habits he retained to connect with the past. He saw a little news story about Martin Reynolds being sentenced to 6 months in jail and a large fine for evading child support. Next to the article was a photo showing three mothers and their children standing outside the courthouse with a look of calm satisfaction on their faces that some kind of justice had finally been served. To Daniel's surprise, one of the women in the photo is Elaine. The article mentions that she attended the hearing as a representative of the Foundation for Children with Genetic Disorders to support these families. She looks different than she remembers, no longer the snazzy-dressed marketing executive, but a more composed, mission-driven woman. Daniel puts down the paper and looks out the window as the sun glints off the lake. His life slowly reorganized itself. A new job, a new apartment, even new friends. The wound is still there, but it doesn't hurt as much anymore. He learned to trust again, albeit much more cautiously. Most importantly, he got rid of that urge to need revenge. That night at Le Jardin, when he pushed the envelope across the table, he thought he was seeking revenge. But now he realizes that he was actually seeking relief, not only for himself, but also for Elaine, and even for those innocent children. The truth is sometimes brutal, but it can also be liberating. Later that day, when Daniel returned to his apartment in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, a new email notification flashed on his laptop screen. The sender surprised him, Elaine Foster. How did she get his new email address? Then he remembered that one of his former co-workers had recently mentioned a work connection with Elaine. It was the first time she had contacted him directly since the divorce. The email was brief. Daniel, I know this email may surprise you, and maybe you don't want to hear from me at all. If that's the case, I totally understand. Seeing today's paper, I'm guessing you probably already know the outcome of Martin's trial. I want you to know that this past year has been a time of deep reflection and change for me. I have become a full-time employee of the Children with Blood Disorders Foundation, working closely with Sophie and other mothers to help children like Michael get the support they need. Through this experience, I realized how deeply wrong I was and what is really important in life. Not selfish desires or escaping reality, but taking responsibility and helping others. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that your behavior that night at the restaurant, as painfully humiliating as it was for me, ultimately led to some positive changes. Sophie asked me to pass on her thanks. She said that without your courage to expose the truth, these children may never have gotten the justice they deserved. I used to ask myself why you chose that way to expose the truth and why you humiliated us in public. Now I understand that sometimes the truth needs to be exposed in the light of day to make a real difference. Anyway, I hope you find peace and happiness in your new life. All the best to you, Elaine. Attached is a photo showing Elaine with a group of children in a hospital playroom. The children were sitting around her, and she was reading a book to them. Her expression was gentle and focused, a far cry from the ambitious marketing executive Daniel remembered. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a complex rush of emotions: sadness, nostalgia, a hint of relief, and even a strange kind of pride that Elaine had found new meaning in her life. The woman who had hurt him was now helping those innocent children. It was a salvation he had never anticipated. Eventually, he decided to reply. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he began typing. Elaine, thanks for the news and photos. Frankly, I've never been sure if I acted out of a sense of justice or vengeance that night at Le Jardin. Seeing what you're doing now, I think maybe some of both. I'm glad to hear you found new meaning. Even though our ways are not what I would have chosen, life moves on. I'm sure those kids are very lucky to have your support. I'm settled in Chicago, working for a new company, and life is slowly getting back on track. I started learning photography. Remember that hobby we used to talk about? Sometimes it takes losing something to discover new possibilities. Please give my regards to Sophie and the children. May you find lasting peace and fulfillment on your new path. Daniel. After sending the email, Daniel stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the Chicago skyline at night. The city lights reflect off the surface of Lake Michigan, creating a fantastic sight. He took a deep breath of the cool night air and felt a calmness he had never known before. He clicked send and closed the laptop. Outside the window, the Chicago nightscape was dazzling, the lights of the skyscrapers twinkling like stars. Daniel was reminded of the saying, "The truth hurts sometimes, but a lie destroys everything in the end." A few weeks later, Daniel received an unexpected package with no return address, but postmarked from Boston. Opening the package, he found a hardcover photo album. Turning to the first page, I saw familiar handwriting. "Daniel, this is a project Sophie's kid Michael did. He made thank you albums for all the people who helped him. He insisted on sending a copy to his truth-telling uncle. I think you'll enjoy seeing the smiles on these kids' faces. They showed incredible courage and hope despite the tough challenges life gave them. In a way, you helped create this little family. These children and mothers now support each other and no longer feel alone." Martin recently contacted Sophie and requested to see the children. Amazingly, after this ordeal, he seems to be really changing. Nurses at the hospital said he often visited the children, bringing gifts and books. Of course, trust takes time to rebuild, but it's a start. As for me, I'm learning to forgive Martin, to forgive myself, and hopefully even to be forgiven by you someday. But anyway, I've come to terms with past choices and their consequences. Best wishes for your new life in Chicago. Your photography portfolio, yes, I saw the ones you posted online, is beautiful. You've always had a gift for capturing beautiful moments, even in the darkest of moments. Always grateful, Elaine. The album is a series of photos, children playing in the hospital playroom, laughing at a picnic, and displaying their artwork at a fundraiser. On the last page is a photo of all the children and their mothers holding a hand-painted banner. "Thank you to all who helped us." Daniel gently closes the album and walks over to the window. At the moment, everything seemed to take on a new meaning. On that fateful night, when he pushed that envelope across the table, he not only exposed Martin's lies, but also confronted the truth in his marriage to Elaine. It wasn't just an act of revenge, it was liberating, a chance to face the truth for all those involved in this tragedy. It reminded him of what the private investigator had said during his last meeting with Frank. Sometimes the real power of exposing the truth lies not in punishing the guilty, but in freeing the victims and giving them a chance to rebuild their lives. At the time, Daniel didn't fully understand what that meant, but now he does. 6 months later, Daniel's photographs were exhibited in a small Chicago gallery. The theme of the exhibition is Moments of Transformation, capturing the subtle but decisive turning points in people's lives. On opening night, a woman wearing glasses stopped in front of one of the photos for a long time. It was a black and white photograph of a lonely envelope sitting on a dining room table with blurred candlelight and wine glasses in the background. "There's something strangely powerful about this photo," the woman commented, "as if we're witnessing the beginning of a momentous occasion, but don't know how it will end." Daniel smiled, not revealing the story behind the photo. Some truths just need to exist in memory without having to be spoken. For Daniel, the greatest lesson is not about the pain of betrayal, but the power of honesty and the possibility of self-rebuilding. In a maze of lies, only the truth can show the way out, no matter how difficult that path may be. And sometimes that path leads us to unexpected places. As he walked out of the gallery and into the Chicago night air toward his home, Daniel knew he'd finally found the path altogether. Not the path of vengeance, not the path of pain, but the path of truth, freedom, and new life. Somewhere in Boston, Elaine is also walking her own path, taking on the mistakes of the past, trying to make amends, and finding new meaning. And Martin, in the hospital corridors, may be learning how to be a responsible father and face the consequences of his choices. And then there are the kids, especially Michael, who find strength and hope in the face of adversity, creating a new family built on real connections. For different paths in life stemming from the same turning point, that envelope on the dining room table and the truth hidden inside. And that truth, however painful, ultimately holds the possibility of redemption for everyone. Because sometimes the darkest moments are exactly where the light begins. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.